All right, here we go. Microphone check 1, 2. Why don't you go ahead and check the microphone real quick?
Microphone check 1, 2. Phillies are winning 7-0 at the top of the 8th. Let's fucking go.
Okay, so we got the sound, we got the notes, we got everything else. All right, I think we're good. All right, lateral bot. Why don't you go ahead and fire this up?
Beep boop. Rebooting the Lateral Show, a sideways look at fantasy football.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lateral Show. Fasten your seatbelts, because here we go.
Yeets and greets, it's the Lateral Show with your hosts, Herms and McLateral. Beep boop.
Welcome back, ladies and germs, to another edition of the Lateral Show, a sideways look at fantasy football. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, you can do so. You can find it at the Lateral FF. My name is Herms on Twitter at Herms NFL. He is McLateral on Twitter, a couple different places. What a wild NFL trade deadline we had ourselves. Dude, I was pretty surprised by some of the moves that we saw.
Yeah, it's definitely been more exciting than I think any of the past couple of years I can remember. Some very consequential moves made today, and I think it's potentially going to be a trend going forward. Sorry, trade still on my mind, but we'll see. I think the NFL has taken some lessons from the NBA, and they're doing a little more of the trades, and like the draft capital is getting more interesting. And so I'm curious to see how that trend continues next year. But for now, we can still focus on this year because there's a ton to go over.
Yes, there is. And that is the theme of the show this week. Instead of, us coming up with a topic of our own to discuss and go through or whatever, this felt like the most appropriate thing to do. A ton of stuff happened, and there's a ton of fantasy football fallout, from the players going to their new teams, the players that are on the teams that they left behind, and all sorts of fun madness. So no onesie topics from me and him. So just that it's the Lateral Show trade deadline special for 2022. That's basically what we're looking at here. I guess quickly, just on my soapbox, I want to say, I'm not going to give too much away because we'll talk a little bit more about this trade. But shout out the Pittsburgh Steelers general manager Omar Khan, first year on the job. This is just look. He hasn't made like a ton of moves. He hasn't really made his impression on this franchise yet, but as a lifelong fan of the team, I like what he's been doing so far. I am very happy, selfishly, with what happened on that front. So, again, not going to say too much more about it. We have plenty of time to talk about that. But, Omar Khan, you my guy.
Yeah, I think for my soapbox, basically I'm going to have the Phillies game on in the background, so apologizes if I get distracted for a second. We're in the World Series. I'm very excited. And the game from yesterday got postponed today. So that's where we're at. Oh, and also Kyrie Irving can go fuck himself.
Yes, all of that. I know.
Honestly, the whole Nets organization kind of can, because the Ime Udoka thing isn't great either. But this is a football podcast.
I don't know nearly as much about that other situation, but at least as far as the Kyrie thing goes, I don't know a lot about it, but I know enough to know that it's horrible and that I don't want to know any more about it because, like you said, he can go fuck himself.
Yeah, if you want to know, there's a Pablo Torre from ESPN tweet that really just sums up what a mess it is.
Yeah, that
You'll
is
know it when you see it.
That is actually the only context of the situation that I have. That tweet, and
it's
I'm
all you need. It's really all you need.
Okay, so if you feel like putting yourself through that, go find it. Otherwise, we have fun things to talk about.
Yes,
about the NFL trade deadline reaction show or whatever we're technically calling this, but
NFL
Right.
trade deadline madness is what the show sheet says.
Yeah, NFL trade
go with
deadline
that.
madness. Let's go. Yeah. That's what it's all about, folks. Yes, we got sound effects. We do. That's what we do on this show here. But I always forget this every week, but not this week. Before we get in to the stuff that we're talking about this week, we do have to go over the stuff that we talked about in last week's episode. And you, the fastest minute in fantasy football podcasting, McLateral, why don't you go ahead and give our listeners and or viewers a recap of our stories from last week?
All right. Well, Yeats and Greets people, let's get into it. All right. Last week, it was a week 8 running back rumble. Herms went over running back situations that are changing. CMC and the Niners was the first one, and they are looking pretty good. CMC finished RB2 in PPR scoring, and Jimmy Garoppolo was the only player that we expected to possibly be fantasy relevant last week that wasn't. Though we still finished at QB14, which is like solid. Yeah. They beat the Rams pretty handily. CMC is still absolutely elite, and he just now also throws touchdowns. Pretty good. New York Jets, not so much. The team is still hindered by Zach Wilson not being good at football and had a tough matchup against the New England Patriots. Things could change, but Michael Carter, who was RB30 in PPR scoring last week, looks to be the clear leader of this committee, especially in the passing game. He saw 7 targets. Meanwhile, I talked about next man up RBs who will still be available. And boy, I hope they were, and you were able to get some of them, particularly Donta Foreman, who finishes the RB5 in PPR scoring. Don't really need to say much more about that. He was electric. Also pretty good Latavius Murray, who finishes the RB22, but he might have just been replaced by Chase Edmonds. More on that later. But first, Keontae Ingram got literally 0 opportunities, 0 offensive snaps. It was a bit shocking considering the rest of the Arizona backfield wasn't good at all. Both Eno Benjamin and Darrell Williams were bad in that loss to the Vikings. So not quite sure what happened there. Maybe Keontae Ingram said something Cliff Kingsbury that we don't know about. I can't think of a better reason. And then Deion Jackson remains complicated, but luckily he's also remaining kind of just strictly an injury handcuff. Jonathan Taylor was back, but twisted his ankle. So we could see Jackson come up to being relevant as soon as this week because Nyheim Hines is now gone. Again, more on that later because Zach Moss is also now in. Again, more on that later because it's going to be an insane show today. I still lean on Jackson being the handcuff, but who knows at this point? Anything's possible. And that's it. That's the recap.
There it is, folks. Bomb drop, end of the recap. We got it under control here at the Lateral Show. Now, we get to dive in, folks. Here we go. Dude. Oh, my gosh. So many different things, so many different trades, so many different players. I'm getting woozy. All right. I got to calm down. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, sir, we're going to start with what happened today or the trade that took place while we were off because of when our show releases.
Actually, yeah, we can go over that one real quick just because, in what do they call that? What do you call when things are in time order? What is that?
Chronological.
Yeah, I have no idea why that just fell out of my head for so. Yes, okay, there we go. He's Herms, the college graduate. We could do this in chronological order.
All right. Well, so the first thing while Herms composes himself was, unless you lived under a rock, Kansas City made a blockbuster trade pretty much right after our podcast dropped, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. They got Kadarious Toney, who might finally be the replacement for Tyreek Hill. He was traded to the New York Giants for the Kansas City Chiefs 2023 third rounder and 2023 sixth rounder. Research I did not indicate any of those picks being conditional, but it could be wrong. And for me, this is a huge win. The Chiefs' pass-heavy offense have the highest points scored this season and the second highest yards per play. But they've basically been looking for a wide receiver one to replace Tyreek Hill. Toney might just be it. Juju has done okay, but he's not a typical wide receiver one. Marcus Valdes-Scantling has been adequate, but I mean, we all knew he wasn't probably going to be elite. And then there's been the huge disappointment that is Sky Moore. I mean, as soon as Healthy got traded, all of a sudden I got like the sleeper alert that's like Kadarious Toney is now healthy. So very curious about that, as well as your thoughts, because I think this is massive, and hopefully people were able to scoop up Kadarious Toney wherever they could in their redraft leagues.
Yeah, so before I give my take, I did want to make sure that I pulled that exact information up to give people an idea as to exactly how available he still is. Now, like you said, he probably would have had to act pretty fast in a lot of leagues, but his
Especially because people got very excited once this happened.
exactly, man. But his Yahoo rostership percentage is still at 57% and on ESPN 53.9. So not like it's above the 50% threshold we and I would say most people around the industry like to hold themselves to, but that's still a lot of leagues.
Still solid, yeah.
Yeah. So definitely think about it. And then as far as my reaction to the whole thing, look, we spent a lot of time the collective fantasy football thinking like, oh, well, how are they going to replace Tyreek Hill? And I think, I said it was either this show or it was another show that I went on, it's like when you lose a player that's that good and like that impactful, you don't just replace them with one guy to the same effect that, like Major League Baseball teams will platoon outfielders or like platoon a first baseman or whatever. Cause like, if you lose somebody as impactful as, and I don't think the Braves did this, but just because it fits the example, like when Freddie Freeman left for the Dodgers, like it's not uncommon for certain teams to, just go with the guy that can play against the righty and a guy that can play against the lefty and whatever, it was going to take a village to, supplement all of that. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Juju Smith-Schuster, they were never going to do that by themselves. And also, I think huge lesson to take away from this, landing spot, not always something you need to factor in too much because Sky Moore, I mean that, oh boy, oh man, I remember a lot of people trying to convince me it's like small school, but look at the metrics and blah blah blah. Now he's going to be with Patrick Mahomes and blah blah. It's like that doesn't make you all of a sudden just like good at football. So, like not to insinuate that I think Sky Moore's career is over by any means, but like Toney coming in does kind of say a thing or two about that. But at any rate, to quickly, close up my thoughts before I send it back to you, Toney is the closest thing to the Tyreek Hill archetype of any of those guys that we just mentioned. So by virtue of that alone, just being a bottle rocket that could do a ton, once the ball is in his hands after the catch, doing whatever, it makes a lot of sense for this Andy Reid offense. At best, he immediately just becomes the number one weapon, but at worst, he's the nothing burger that you had sitting on your roster the whole time anyway. So I wouldn't even say it's like a, like there's no like binary win-lose with this. You know what I mean? I think weirdly, the fact that nothing could change makes it a bizarre win-win.
Oh, there we go. That's interesting. It does feel like a win-win for the NFL teams. I think the biggest winner is Kadarious Toney. I mean, he could now be finally the wide receiver one on a team that likes him. I actually don't know that it's so much an indictment of Sky Moore. I think Sky Moore has done enough of that with his play on the field, which has been subpar at best.
That's fair.
Because I think the thing we saw this offseason, I've been thinking about since the Toney trade happened, is once the Chiefs let Tyreek Hill go for that haul, all we heard was about how they're trying to bring in a free agent wide receiver, like a big one.
That's
or
true.
Trade for a
Yeah.
big one.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't want to pay an aging Tyreek a ton of money. And they also got offered a ton of assets in exchange. Like it was a smart trade for them to take. So I think this is potentially that move. Now, I don't think any of us expected that to be Kadarious Toney. But they did not have to overpay to get him. So if it doesn't work, great. Who cares? And if it works, awesome. Like they have a new wide receiver one for a long time. So I'm going to be really curious to see how it turns out because he could definitely succeed in this Kansas City offense. It really comes down to, is the change of scenery going to be enough to take care of the mental issues that have been rumored from his time in New York? And will he suddenly be healthy? Because, he seemed injured this year, but then
That's
all
true.
of a sudden
Yeah.
he was healthy once he landed in Kansas City. So who knows how much of that was like stuff with the Giants and how much of it was him actually being injured. Because all of a sudden Kenny Galladay is injured too. And I don't know that I believe that. So so who knows? But yeah, Kadarious Toney, if he is available in your leagues, you should go get him. I think he's got top 36 upside for sure.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. And as far as the Giants side of it, there's not really a lot for us to break down because we have both spoke glowingly about Wan'Dale Robinson in the past. So,
and Kadarious Toney didn't really feel like part of their plans, even if he was going to be healthy, which is why this trade makes so much sense. So to me, my calculus on the Giants essentially is unchanged.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Like there's, unlike some of the other trades that we're going to talk about in the remainder of this show, this is kind of just a one-side analysis because, like you said, they weren't going to do anything with him anyway. He wasn't in the lineup anyway. So, he's definitely out of there. So I think that puts a nice bow on that, right?
It does. So do you want to get into today's first blockbuster trade?
Yes. Dude. Oh, my Lord.
Vikings have acquired TJ Hockenson from the Detroit Lions.
Oh, my Lord.
What?
There weren't even rumors of TJ Hockenson being on the trade market. Oh, man. Especially, we don't see, divisions within this, trades within the same division very often.
Especially because you feel like, the Lions probably know they aren't going to be competitive this year at this point.
Of course.
Which we'll get into more of that here in a minute because I think that's going to be bad news for someone. But I feel like they think they're going to be competitive next year.
Yeah.
And so if you think you're going to be competitive next year, I'm not sure why you trade your star tight end to a division rival. Though, the whole not so bad.
Especially because it gives them more draft capital flexibility to, if they really want to be aggressive within the first round of next year's draft, beyond the pick that they already have and whatnot, they have ammo to move up and really get some impact guys. So that, from that perspective, it's kind of interesting, but that's a little bit outside the fantasy realm. So
and weirdly, because wasn't Dan Campbell a tight ends coach?
He was a tight end.
Yeah, so it's weird because it doesn't feel like this team actually wanted to use a tight end. They wanted to use their receivers. And so I think this move signals that a little. I think they can bring in someone replacement level-ish and kind of do the job that they want their tight end to do.
Yeah. And Hockenson did handle a sizable workload. He had a 18.1% target share and a 16.5% air yard share. But, I don't necessarily know that they're going to replace another guy with that target share per se, but in the, kind of cursory research I was doing, shout out 4for4.com resource that, I've always shouted out on the show. Great website. The air yard share is not a ton. I mean, I can't even remember. Brock Wright, I think, is the one name left over that could be interesting. I guess in a super deep league or something.
Yeah, I'm not interested in any of their tight ends this year. And I think next year I won't be either. I think next year it's going to be the Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown show. So real quick, Lions traded Hockenson for Hockenson, a 2023 fourth and a conditional 2024 fourth for a 2023 second and a 2024 third.
That is correct.
And Minnesota actually throws to their tight end about 20% of their targets. And he's going to be the only tight end there because Irv Smith is done.
That's the other part of it for sure. And I think, I don't know, Hawkinson's going to have his 5th year option, so at most, at minimum, he will be around at least for another year and a half, presumably. And then who knows if the Vikings sign him long-term, but just the quick Irv Smith dynasty check pit stop. I think it's a little bit more,
I mean, first of all, I don't know that he's going to play this year. I mean, a high ankle sprain can end your year, depending on when it happens.
If it's bad enough grade, or the high grade, whatever. Yeah, ugh.
I mean, we saw what happened with Jimmy Garoppolo. What was it, 2 years ago at this point?
Yeah,
he had that high ankle sprain. He kept trying to come back, and eventually that was it. And we've seen it with, I think, Christian McCaffrey as well. Didn't he suffer one in the past couple of years?
Not just him, but all sorts of running backs, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's
So
a
the
brutal
injury is
injury.
no joke. It can be as quick as 4 weeks or
Njoku
usually
right
6.
now.
Yeah. And the theory on him was 5 to 7. By the way, David Njoku being out, and then the Cleveland Browns replacing his workload with 0% Harrison Bryant, not okay. Not okay. I was
did
not
bum me
ready for
out.
that.
Yeah, I picked up Bryant as a kind of a
I played him
sneaky
in Scott
sleeper.
Fishbowl.
Yeah,
I'm like, come on.
That definitely did annoy me, but I don't know. At least bring it back to Hockenson.
Yes,
just like my
yes.
quick perspective on how it affects things over in Minnesota is just like not really any dramatic change for Justin Jefferson,
Nope.
or Dalvin Cook or anything. It's a boost to the fantasy
Maybe a
values.
little less targets for Dalvin Cook. Not like a ton, but just like a little.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah. But like I think the other person, like, and also like Hockenson is a bit of a net neutral to some degree. I mean, like obviously, he'll be involved. It's a system where
I think it's a slight improvement because they'll still get decent target share. Again, they throw to the tight end group a fair amount.
Yeah.
And I think the quality of target's going to be better.
Yeah. So like I think if anything, this is a big Kirk Cousins thumbs up, just in terms of like, he's already in the weekly discussion for, low end QB1, high end QB2 anyway, but now it's just like, oh wow, look, he has TJ Hockenson too. So like, it solidifies him a little bit more.
Yeah,
but like,
I would say Kirk Cousins up, TJ Hockenson like slightly up. Detroit Lions, like decent. Jameson Williams, thumbs down.
We disagree on this, but you did bring it up first, so you have the first crack.
I think they're going to put him on ice. I am still going to hold on to my shares because hopefully you have IR spots and you can afford to do so. I think he is valuable if he does come back. I think this signals that their season is done.
That possibility only occurred to me for the first time.
Oh, are you serious?
The minute that you said it, and now I feel like an idiot. That's
No, it's not a football take. Like Jameson Williams to the moon next season.
Yeah. No, I just meant like I completely overlooked the possibility that this went. All right. Well,
yeah. No, it's not a football thing. Like if he was healthy,
you make a compelling point. Yeah.
If they decide to slot him in this season, which again is why I'm going to still hold on to him, then like thumbs up. Like this opens up target share for him. It's good for him for a footballing perspective. I think there's a real chance they put him on ice this season and their season is over. I think they're not full on tanking, but they are officially, as we saw today, sellers.
Yeah, no, you've changed my perspective on it. I mean, like I will still say if he does come back, as you say, if he does come back, then like wheels up for sure. Like obviously, like but
still good at football, still probably the wide receiver 1 to 1A, somewhere in that ballpark for this offense. Depends on your opinion, but like they invested a top 12 pick in him, so. But I think because they invested a top 12 pick in him and they're clearly not making the playoffs this year, I don't think they're going to put him in.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I guess my like final note is the possibility that like losing a relatively quote unquote short area target in just a tight end in general, just in an offense and how that functions. I mean, like some of that will go to Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously, but also just look out for the possibility that so far this season, when healthy at least, DeAndre Swift not catching as many passes, but I think there's at least a possibility for PPR scoring that maybe that goes up just a little bit for him. So
I would agree. I think the issue there is you're already playing those two guys anyway if they're healthy. And I think it's going to be – it might honestly be more impactful for Swift. I think for Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's like clearly earning the targets anyway. Yeah. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. But for Swift to be more of that safety valve, more of that like short to mid-range guy is entirely possible, and we've seen him do it.
So generally speaking, to put a bow on it, negligible difference for everybody unless Jameson Williams plays this year.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. We got that one, folks. We got that one in the books. And then I think, if I remember correctly, we're moving on to the one that I've got. Oh,
Correct.
I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm taking the lead because all right. So I see the news break. All right. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So Chase Claypool gets traded, right? Like no longer on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The log jam on that, roster is now clear. So it's just like, okay, Pickens can do his thing. Claypool can do his thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But to bring it back to my personal level of amusement, the initial reporting was that this was going to be the Ravens' second-round pick that the Bears had just acquired in that deal for Roquan Smith. Now, would I have been okay with that? Sure. But there was part of me that was just like, damn, would have been really cool if we would have gotten the Bears' second-round pick instead, because that's going to be one of the top picks in the second round. Then, lo and behold, Ian Rappaport coming through. I have no idea what imagine passing on George Pickens in the NFL draft twice. And then
I mean, that's its own issue.
Right? Like, but then to do that in the first place and then surrender another second round pick to get the shittier of the two guys.
Yeah.
Like, shout out Omar Khan for just fleecing. I loved it. I loved it so much. All right. I have to calm down. But like that, I was laughing my ass off. Like, I'm so happy.
Yeah, so I think this kind of works out for everyone. So again, as we've mentioned, the Steelers traded Claypool for the Bears' original 2023 second. Claypool gets a quarterback upgrade, in my opinion, with Justin Fields. Whether or not it's an offense upgrade is debatable. This was a really interesting stat that I found. So the Bears throw to the wide receiver the fourth most in the NFL in terms of target share.
Mm-hmm.
They throw to the wide receiver the fourth least in terms of raw targets.
That's kind of the interesting thing. So just to quickly add to that before, because I don't mean to interrupt you necessarily, but like this goes directly with what you're talking about. So the Steelers have attempted the 8th most passes of any team in the NFL this year, 295. Mm-hmm. In stark contrast to the Bears, who are tied for the fewest at 160 passing attempts. So it's cool that he gets to move up in the pecking order on his new team, but at what cost?
So that's the other thing. So it remains to be seen whether Claypool or Mooney is the wide receiver one going forward. I think it could frankly be either of them. I actually slightly lean Claypool because I think he is more talented, but he also has to get mentally there, and maybe the change of scenery will do that. Maybe it won't. I think it's far from certain either way. As you mentioned, George Pickens to the moon. I think Deontay Johnson gets a slight bump up from this. But really, I think it comes down to like Claypool or Mooney wide receiver one. Who is it?
I mean,
because I don't know that Fields is super attached to Mooney either. I think he likes the guy well enough. I don't think he was like, demanding that he get like a alpha wide receiver in or something. And so Claypool, not exactly that.
Yeah.
Like
we're still in the get to know you stage of the Luke Getsy offense, just because like it did start the season in the 1950s. Just like
we were talking about it. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. So like
and to be fair, they still ran the ball, I think 31 times with their running backs alone, not including Fields' rushing attempts last week.
Yeah. So like assuming the offense looks a little more like it has, lately anyway, and whatever influence Matt Eberflus as the head coach has over that coming over from, his days in Indianapolis or whatever, like I guess from an archetypal standpoint, like Claypool probably would be the kind of guy for that offense. But the thing about the pairing of those two receivers that I love the most is that, I've always said on a handful of shows that I've been on in the past, like Darnell Mooney does kind of give me like a little bit of Deontay Johnson vibes with the type of player that he is. So like based on that alone, like they paired complementary receivers very well. And I do have to, like, for as hilarious as the draft pick compensation is, which I will still laugh about for just months to come, it does make sense for what they're trying to do. And also, I was seeing a back and forth on Twitter between shout out to homie Christian Williams, over there at Football Guys doing his thing, and also shout out to homie Dave Kluge over there at Football Guys. They were going back and forth about it, because Dave being the Bears fan and whatnot.
Sure.
Christian tweeted out just a list of like the upcoming free agent class, and it's a lot of like Jacoby Myers stands above that for sure, is like really good, but then after that it's guys like Marvin Jones and some, like, it's not great. So I guess like when you kind of think about it, like a year and a half of Claypool, considering what's coming up on the free agent market, especially as the Bears continue to build forward, like it's not as humorous as the reaction that I'm giving it is. It's like, so it was a good move. Was it an overpay? Yeah. I think objectively speaking, that is true.
It's weird because the correct price was honestly probably somewhere in the middle. Like the Bears' second was probably too high and the Ravens' pick was probably just slightly too low.
But like, true, but like had it been the Ravens, because even like I said before, it's just like if it had been, I would have been like, okay.
I think everyone would have been fine with it. I think everyone would have been fine, except for clearly the Pittsburgh front office.
Yeah, and I also
can't imagine that the Bears offered their pick first. They must have offered the Ravens pick first.
Because I think it was Josina Anderson did tweet out something to the effect that like the Packers stepped up and they were like, "Here's a second, doing whatever." But then I guess the Bears kind of heard so like that. I am not plugged into this situation at all.
Okay.
But
that's interesting.
So I don't have any personal insight into this. Mind you, I am not a reporter, but I do have social media, and I did read that tweet. So I mean that's a possibility.
By the way, for our Packers fans that are listening, this is not going to be a fun show for you.
No, this absolutely will not at all. But
fun show for Dolphins fans, maybe though.
Before we get to the Dolphins, I just gotta say, just real quick, just because like George Pickens in your lineup every week.
Oh yeah,
just like straight
which was
up.
Kind of the case with Kenny Pickett under center anyway, but now it's a lock.
Yeah, the logjam is gone. Just George Pickens with confidence. You're good.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've now entered the Miami Dolphins portion of the show because there were a couple of trades for the Dolphins, and I think there were 3 moves that were fantasy relevant. So Bradley Chubb got traded along with a 2025 fifth rounder to the Dolphins, and the Broncos in return got a 2023 first from San Francisco, which they traded to get Trey Lance, 2024 fourth, and a certain running back we'll get to here in a minute. But again, the big news there from an NFL standpoint, Bradley Chubb going to the Dolphins, boosting that defense. I think it has a little bit of fantasy implications. The Dolphins got some okay matchups, and it improves a defense that's been kind of shockingly bad. Like there is talent on that defense. So it's something to keep an eye on, given that the Dolphins are widely available.
Yes.
But I think as far as the Bradley Chubb stuff goes, that's about it. So on to the other big news.
I mean, I guess I just do want to briefly point out so even though technically it's not the Trey Lance trade, quote unquote, that pick eventually it turned into Trey Lance basically because one of those picks, I think, was like moved up to get Jalen Waddle.
Yeah.
One of those picks was also used to acquire Tyreek Hill. And then this other pick was used to acquire Bradley Chubb. So essentially, this was letting the 49ers have Trey Lance in exchange for Bradley Chubb, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle.
And I have to say, as a Niners fan who thinks Trey Lance can still succeed, I'd rather have those 3 pieces.
Yeah. I just wanted to point that out because I did see that, and I was like,
it's pretty wild.
I hadn't actually thought about this until just now. And then when I was confronted with that information.
Trades.
Yeah, dude, wild. Just I don't know. Yeah, there's not really a whole lot to take away from that other than amusement, but just something kind of fun to think about.
Well, two other things are wild. First of all, the Phillies have just beaten the Houston Astros 7-0 to claim a 2-1 World Series lead. And the Chase Edmonds era in Miami is over. It lasted less than a year. He was the running back that was part of this trade. He is now on the Broncos. He was a total afterthought on this Dolphins offense and was one of their big free agent spends. So it was all the more shocking. My gut reaction, though, this is actually good for anyone who's still holding on to Edmonds. He might be available to pick up in your league, so go check it out, because I think he's the Latavius Murray replacement, unfortunately. For people that picked up Latavius Murray, somewhat on my advice, I did not see this coming. And to be fair, Latavius Murray last week actually did pretty good. But the Broncos just clearly don't feel they quite have the answer at running back. Now, what I'm really curious is, A, how do you see the Broncos running back pecking order for this year? And then just a little bit on, what do you think it is for next year? Because Chase Edmonds still has a bit of contract left.
He does. And that really, probably more so. This is more so of a dynasty thing, because the elephant in the room is Javonte Williams. And once he comes back from the ACL tear,
will clearly be the RB1 in that offense.
But how much exactly does that mean?
When you're also still clearly in a committee.
Exactly. So that's, I never got on board with how high the dynasty community had Javonte Williams, through no fault of his own, in their rankings. And now we're just seeing further confirmation that the freeing of Javonte Williams, akin to the free Aaron Jones movement, akin to the free whoever, there are some things that just don't happen or take so long to happen that it we're only going to get a small window of that level of production from them. So it's just disappointing. We may be looking at that for Javonte Williams. But then as far as this year goes, I don't know if I agree with you on the RIP Latavius thing, only because they're also not confident in Melvin Gordon at all.
So it might be an RIP, honestly, everyone thing.
Yeah.
But I think Chase Edmonds, I think he's going to be in flex territory.
Potentially. And the shittiest part of all of this is actually, at least from my perspective, just trying to process it in my brain, I'm not going to feel confident until I see at least 2 games out of this. So the immediate takeaway from it, well, first, okay, so my immediate takeaway from this trade was, hate to say I told you so for all the people about Chase Edmonds, because I talked about that a lot in the offseason. It was a trap. So, but bringing it back to the, more steeped in reality of the situation right now, it's better that he's not wasting away doing nothing, so you can recoup some of that initial investment cost value, whatever fancy term I'm trying to think of. There's a possibility for that to revive itself, but this team is so weird, man. When Javonte went down, while Gordon was already having his issues, they tried with Mike Boone. He got a little bit banged up. They tried with some other people. They're throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. Which is odd, because where they are in that division right now, I don't really know what they're fighting that hard for anyway. Especially
they've sunk all this money into Russell Wilson. You have to then contend.
Yeah.
You've locked in your future. Now, I will say the one thing here. So we talked about the Javonte of it all, and I think they ultimately do end up platooning him with someone. There's a chance it's neither Chase Edmonds or Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon, free agent after this season.
Not coming back.
Don't have to bring him back. I don't think he'd want to come back at this point.
Absolutely.
And here's the interesting with Chase Edmonds. As we mentioned, yes, he does have a contract still. If I'm reading over the cap correctly, the Broncos can cut him and save the entirety of his contract. if I'm reading it correctly, so I'm looking at a cut pre-June 1st. He's got a $6 million cap number for next season, which high. If they cut him, there's zero dead money and $6 million cap savings.
Okay, so if you want to throw it on the screen so that like viewers in the comments, if we're wrong, point it out in the comment section.
Let's see what we can do here. Share a screen. Let's go with Chrome tab.
Yeah. So once you do that, I'll take down the overlay like in tandem.
So if I'm reading this correctly here, so this is post June 1. This is pre June 1. And I do believe they can save the entirety of his cap.
Well, okay.
So that doesn't mean that they will necessarily cut him. He'll still be like on the younger side. And he actually weirdly could be a good compliment. But they aren't locked into him. Not as much as you would think at first glance. So I really do think it becomes an issue of like what happens this season. How does everything shake out? And as we mentioned, Melvin Gordon not coming back. So they're not necessarily going to commit to him. I know the GM said that they are, but who believes that,
Not at this point, I don't know.
Yeah. So final thoughts on the Broncos running back situation before we turn to the Dolphins?
I got way more interesting stuff to say about the Dolphins backfield, so we can drop it.
All right. Well, reunited, and it feels so good. Jeff Wilson Jr. reunites with head coach, former offensive coordinator for the Niners, now current head coach Mike McDaniel for the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins sent a 2023 bid to the Niners to replace Chase Edmonds with Jeff Wilson Jr. It solves San Francisco's problem of not needing a ton of running backs now that they have Christian McCaffrey, arguably the best in the business. I think Wilson has looked good this season. I think he instantly becomes a top-tier handcuff. He could even supplant Mostert if Mostert starts to slip. Like, if you can somehow buy low or at a reasonable price, I would want to get in, even in redraft, well, especially in redraft, honestly, on Jeff Wilson Jr.
Yeah, man, and there are a number of possibilities just in terms of what could shake out here. But one thing I do got a cough. Oh my god. Okay, that just horrible timing. As I'm about to just drop the super cool knowledge, I just have a weird cough. It happens. I don't know. Okay, so I did the fantasy football fallout article for this over at Clutch Points, and before being the offensive coordinator, Mike McDaniel was the run game coordinator from 2017 to 2020. So the entirety of Jeff Wilson's career, he came into the league in 2018 for context. He's been working closely with this man basically the entire time. Yeah. So like amazing fit. Just also wanted to point that out because not even just OC before, but like run game guy. So like that's pretty cool.
McDaniel clearly likes his former Niners running backs because he now has two of them.
Exactly, dude. So it's like, that says everything. Like immediate familiarity with the coach, the guy you're going to be running in tandem with, presumably, and also just like the blocking system and all that's probably going to be the same anyway. You might have to learn some different, verbiage to be able to communicate or whatever. But I mean, that's the same case anytime you move teams for the most part. But the interesting thing to me, generally speaking, is that like they've both been really good this season.
Yeah,
both
they have.
Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert. So per 4 for 4, they are the RB27 and 30 overall, respectively. That is Mostert and Wilson, averaging 10 and 9.2 points per game, respectively. So the other part of it, we talked about Chase Edmonds. We talked about how he fell out of favor. Like at first glance, you look at this and say, Jeff Wilson backup, premium handcuff, that could be pretty cool. But for the first 3 weeks of the season, before Edmonds was phased out of the Dolphins offense in week 4, Edmonds handled an average of 9.7 touches per game, while Mostert received 9.3 in that span. It is possible, especially with the familiarity that we've outlined, that he could just deploy both and everyone wins.
I think he will deploy both. I think Mostert will probably then take a bit of a hit production-wise. But yeah, I mean, this team now suddenly looks really good on offense. Not that it looked bad to begin with. You got Tua firing on all cylinders. You have two of the best wide receivers in the league. You now got two running backs that are, punching above their weight class, so to speak. Like, you want pieces of this Miami Dolphins offense.
Yeah. And like, even if the split does go back to what the Dolphins intended to do at the beginning of the year, like, yes, does Mostert lose some? Sure. But
he should still be playable.
Yeah. And like, he's an older running back. He has an injury history. This could
You were
theoretically in the
probably
grand
putting him in your flex or RB2 anyway.
Exactly. So it's like, it's only going to keep him fresh, and he's going to be running with a guy that he can this to me is probably the most interesting thing that happened today. Just because, well, I mean, like, a self-proclaimed running back nerd over here, but also like, dude, this offense, like, even though it doesn't have the same star cachet in totality that the Niners team does that he left with, McCaffrey, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle that we talked about last week, but that's still Waddle, Hill, situationally Mike Gesicki when they feel like using a big slot receiver, because he is not a tight end. And even though the names of Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. aren't the sexiest, they understand the McDaniel assignment. This is awesome.
Well, so I think it's not the one I'm the most interested in. That one's going to come up here. But before we get there, let's stay in the state of Florida.
Okay.
And Calvin Ridley's betting on Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Too soon?
The
best part is, if I remember correctly, the Falcons game he got in trouble for betting on was against the Jaguars. That is like the best part of all of this. So the Jags sent a 2023 fifth and a conditional fourth to get Ridley next year. He's still not going to be able to play this year. No impact really this season, obviously, but Lawrence Etienne, Ridley, and Kirk feels like a good offense. So that is probably like how I thought it was smart to invest in Miami's offense this offseason. I think it will be smart to invest in Jacksonville's offense next offseason, which makes my pick. Remember at the beginning of the season, we talked about like some bold predictions for next year. Trevor Lawrence being viewed as a top 12 QB, like he just got Calvin Ridley. This is potentially happening. Also, real quick, rest in peace, Christian Kirk, wide receiver one season. Much like Chase Edmonds RB1 season, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, gotta pour one out real quick. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, like, this is one that, like, when it came across my news feed, I was like, it's pretty cool.
The price is right.
The price, it's pretty cool.
The price is right.
The price is right, and but it will be. Now, I mean, he played kind of a little bit last year, but like, it'll basically be 2 years away from football for Calvin Ridley, and for all of the betting stuff or whatever that he got wrapped up in, like, also, some of the mental health stuff. Like, I hope that this time away has helped him find, some sort of
imagine that he is at least mentally signed off on this, where he's just like, I'm excited to play for this Jaguars team.
Yeah, or even just more generally, like, just excited to play football. Just like, and that's what I think
he's back.
Yeah, and that's what I hope. Like, it'll be difficult for me to project how this affects his dynasty stock, because, like you said, redraft, he's suspended, he can't play. Like, there's no analysis. But like, for dynasty, like, well, also, first of all, I mean, if you held on to him because you probably had to, at least you have something to look at and count on, so that's a positive. But like, I don't know, assuming he's anywhere in the ballpark of the player that he once was, even if it's at minimum 70-75% of what he was able to do, that's like a wide receiver 3 or a flex, bro. Like, especially like in the offense that, he's going to be finding himself in. Like, it's pretty clear so far this season. Like, Doug Peterson wants to be more aggressive than anything that the Urban Meyer bullshit experiment did. So, like, it could be fun. It really could be a lot of
Ridley,
fun.
Kirk, and if they keep him around, Zay Jones will be a surprisingly decent wide receiver core.
Yeah, I mean, like, and now that you mention it, fresh popped thought into my head. This does kind of make me feel less critical of the bizarre amount of money that they threw at wide receivers in free agency, because at least now, theoretically, quote unquote, Ridley being an alpha type, quote unquote, to go along with these, more complementary pieces. Like, and no offense to Christian Kirk or anything like that, but you know what I mean. Like,
well, and Marvin Jones will be gone after this year, and while he's had a great career, I think he's certainly surplus to requirements at this point.
Yeah, so like, it is pretty cool. It is pretty cool. Like, obviously, like, continue listening to the show as the summer of 2023 evolves and we learn more about this situation. Like, at least for now, as we stand in the fall of 2022, could be pretty cool.
Luckily, we have some 2020 news still to hit, because Nyheim Hines is going to Buffalo.
Yeah,
and this is the most interesting thing to me. And it's not because Zach Moss went back to Indianapolis in exchange, which that felt like such a throw-in. It's like, can you take him? Like, we're going to have to cut this guy. If you have it's like when you make the trade with someone and it's like a 2-for-1 and you're like, hey man, I'm like going to literally have to cut this rando. Would you like this rando?
It's just like, we have to make this work somehow. Pretty please. Ugh, fine.
I gotta say, the Colts, I felt like could have gotten more for Hines, because they only got a 2023 conditional 6 that could become a 5th. And so I guess that does make like Moss a little more intriguing, because it feels like if you were to appropriately evaluate Hines, Moss must have been some calculus in that. But from everything we've seen, it has to be a throw in. I'm still betting on Deion Jackson. That's about all the Colts analysis I have on my end of this trade. But for the Bills, he's instantly the RB2. So the question is, does he get James Cook production, which I don't really care about, which is why I didn't draft James Cook in the first place? Does he get J.D. McKissick level production that we've seen at McKissick's time on the Commanders this year accepted, and what they, in theory, were trying to bring J.D. McKissick into do? Now, the one caveat I'll say is, and I said this kind of at the time, I don't think the Bills' offense actually really operates that way. I don't think it's designed in such a way, partially due to the fact that Josh Allen can just yeet the ball downfield to really throw to the running back. So I think they want to be able to do this beautiful Christian McCaffrey, like, we're going to just pepper it to our talented running backs and they'll be speedy and it'll be fun. And meanwhile, they have Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. Like, you barely have to run it with your running backs, let alone.
That is true. Yeah.
So I'm very intrigued into how his workload breaks out. Because if they do force J.D. McKissick-like production from him, he could be the Nyheim Hines we've seen at old, which is an RB2 in fantasy football, a top 24 producing running back. But if he ends up with James Cook production, whether because that's all they were planning on doing anyway, or the offense just naturally lends itself to Josh Allen throwing 99-yard touchdown passes to Davis instead, that will be disappointing and I will want no part of it. So what are your thoughts? Because to me, this was clearly the most fantasy exciting thing that happened today.
So my thoughts are kind of just, it's a list of 3 things. Starting first with, I love how this is peppering targets. That's good. Really glad that we got that visual. And then also I would like to just congratulate myself for spending last night writing the waiver wire column and recording the waiver wire video talking about how now that James Cook is the standalone RB2 in Buffalo, he is a must-add offensive. Look at me, idiot man of the year, right here. Oh God, wow, that was
Man.
very mad at myself for wasting time
Happens.
on
It
that.
happens.
I know, and I did preface at the beginning of the article. It was publishing before the deadline was gonna, so it's whatever. But it's just like, damn it, like,
You never know. It could still shake out your way. Like I told everyone to go pick up Donta Foreman, and I even dropped Gus Edwards everywhere to pick up Donta Foreman, and then J.K. Dobbins gets an ACL like re-aggravation or whatever. And Gus Edwards now becomes the RB1, and the Panthers are like, hey, Chuba Hubbard's our starter. And I'm like, well, don't I feel like a horse's ass? And then it worked out fine because Donta Foreman was RB5 last week, and like Gus Edwards now might be injured again.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will say, though, I feel like if anything did have the part of it that does remain, at least, is like if anything did happen to Devin Singletary, Nyheim Hines being the between the tackle guys is not like between the tackle guy is not something that I would anticipate. There is still
Correct.
at least some opportunity for James Cook to do something. So
if Devin Singletary goes down, James Cook will become the RB1 in that offense as far as the depth chart goes, as far as the like he's the ground and pound quote unquote guy, given they have literally no ground and pound guys, but that's a whole separate issue.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Like that is not what you bring Nyheim Hines in to do.
So then, like the last part of it that I think about, which goes to your points about, as you said, you brought up McKissick for a reason. The Commanders matched the Bills' offer to bring him back in free agency, but the Bills were pretty clear about, what they had intended to do. And something that I always like to point out to people, and again, this doesn't always happen, like we're only making educated guesses based off of the things that we can tell from a distance, because that's all fantasy analysis really is just having a process, making informed decisions based on our process, and doing the best that we can with that information. Teams who have not historically done X thing in the past that then bring in Y player who is good at X thing should at least open us up to the possibility that, like, well, then they're probably going to try to start doing that thing. So while the Bills have not historically done that, I think that, once again, this tells us, like, they're going to throw to the running back.
I think they're going to try.
Yeah.
I think they're going to try. My question is, are they going to succeed? And I'm not sure the answer is yes.
But why not?
Because they have insanely talented receivers and a quarterback who may actually have a literal rocket for an arm. And like, it just doesn't lend it to throttle down your offense when you're literally like the second best team in the league, if not maybe the best. Like, that doesn't make sense.
So I push back on that by saying, hey, it's not that hard to incorporate screenplays into an offense. They're very easy to scheme up.
It's not a like lack of ability. It's just a like it's not going to make sense.
But here's the other thing though. A successful screenplay with an explosive guy like Nyheim Hines can be in open space. Those are huge chunk plays. They really are. I think it does add a very interesting dimension, because constantly pushing it down the field, first of all, is like but also, especially for running out the clock situations, like when you're up and you have the lead and you need to bleed out the clock, but you're on a down that you're, a little bit further distance away from the first, like screenplays are a great way to continue to do that. Or in situations where you're behind and the clock is running and doing whatever, those are also great things to do. So that way you can get the ball out, zoom, get your ass out of bounds and do whatever. So like tactically, it's a really interesting thing for them to add, especially when it gets to playoff time and we start seeing their opponents that, that to me, especially in those key situations, is an amazing facet to possibly add to the team.
I'll make a couple points. One, if it happens in the playoffs, that does nothing for us in fantasy.
That is true.
Two, a couple key plays does not a productive fantasy player make. Having that ability could be great from a game scheming, game script standpoint, like really throwing a changeup in there. But if Nyheim Hines ends up with 3 targets and like 2 carries, it doesn't end up equaling J.D. McKissick's like 10 targets a game. And then
but,
3, the comp I would actually have, because if the Bills are not the best team in the league, the Philadelphia Eagles are. The Philadelphia Eagles have some running backs on their team that would lend them to being able to throw the ball if they want to. You know who has the second least running back targets of any team in the league? The Eagles, because they have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith.
Yes.
And Dallas Goedert. Like, they have all these talented guys. It just, Nick Sirianni literally was Nyheim Hines' like a coordinator at one point.
No, you're right.
Like,
you're right.
It just doesn't necessarily lend you to take the throttle off. It is great from like a roster construction NFL standpoint to have now added this gadget, this like trick into your bag, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Like, it is a good NFL move for the Bills, who, by the way, throw a shocking amount of time to the running back. All of a sudden, they have 55 targets to the running back.
That's what I'm saying, bro.
Which that also leads me to go, well, if they're doing that, it's already not leading to a ton of production from James Cook. Like, how's that going to go for Nyheim Hines? Just something to think about. So it will be really curious to see if they go full throttle into this, because they are throwing to the running back more than they ever have. But I just like, if I had to bet, I don't think it's going to happen. That doesn't mean I am saying you shouldn't like go get Nyheim Hines if he's available on your waiver somehow. Maybe someone dropped him in like anger for some weird reason. Or like if you have Nyheim Hines, dropping him. I'm not advocating that you do that. I'm just saying when week 18 is done and dusted, if Nyheim Hines has a lackluster rest of season, I'm not going to be shocked in terms of fantasy production.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I don't know. If you want to make that decision, tying it into, a point that you had just made, Yahoo managers, 55% of leagues.
Oh, no, that's interesting.
ESPN managers out there, 45.8.
Wow.
You have a chance. Now, and the situation that you outlined, I mean, because we have, slightly different, ranges in our mind.
To me, if he's really that available, he is worth picking up and seeing what the heck happens.
Exactly. So, like, the mid, like the middle ground between the things that we were saying, like, I think we've described the range of possible outcomes, but we both agree that with all of that, because worst case scenario, he's the you never know when it's going to work for you and your lineup guy that we've already seen him
case of bye-week emergency flex / RB2.
Yeah. So basically, like, worst case scenario, he's the guy he has been just in an extremely good offense. Or best case scenario, they, kind of round out certain aspects of the offense and just become completely unpredictable, which would be just amazing to see. You have, like I said, 55% Yahoo, 45.8% chance at ESPN. Like,
even though I'm pessimistic on him, you need to take that chance. If you can afford to, you know what your roster construction is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Don't be a doofus to take a chance, but,
Don't drop George Pickens to go get him, but if you got the ability to go pick him up, go pick him up.
Yeah. And if you do drop George Pickens to do that, I will find your house.
There would be a bit of a mistake now, wouldn't it?
So I will chuck eggs at your front door if you do that, because that would just...
All right, let's move on. There's some guys that stayed put.
Yeah, just kind of bring it to a somber close. Well, I wouldn't say somber, but just like
screeching halt, as it were.
Yeah, so but just like guys that we were really hoping would move. And I know that the first player on our list is somebody that we both roster a ton of, that we were just like, please, 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 and then
I had actually traded my share prior to the news that it seemed likely he would get dealt. But Brandon Cooks is not getting dealt. Apparently. So something to keep an eye on for, I said, 2024 and 2023 for some reason in the show notes. 2023 and 2022 more respectively. Apparently he was really rumored he was going to go to the Cowboys, and they almost had it done. They couldn't figure out the draft compensation. So Brandon Cooks on the Cowboys in 2023, if that happens, I will be touting Brandon Cooks as an option again. if that is the case.
As we do,
But 2022, I think I'm back to being sad.
It is sad, and even if he does get moved at some point, it's worth remembering that an $18 million guaranteed salary is something that's going to have to be negotiated. So, like, it's not going to be not going to be a walk in the dog park, by any means to, get him out of there. But
I think he's open to having that renegotiated because it clearly seems like he wants out.
Oh my God, yeah, dude. I mean, at this point, the process behind people like you and I being Brandon Cook's stans it's sound. Like, this is just a weird year over the course of his entire career where it just didn't happen. But if you invested in him in your draft, don't feel like an idiot because good process told you it was going to be a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, don't let this stop you.
Yep, I think he's probably been one of my two biggest misses this year, the other one being Deontay Johnson. And I feel okay about my process on both, but it did not pan out.
Yeah, and I think I took similar approaches, probably more so in the Cooks realm. Just like, well, if he stays, he'll be fine, but if he gets traded, then woohoo. I took the same process with the next guy.
Oh,
Kareem Hunt's not going anywhere.
He is,
that
not until the end of this year, after which he'll become a unrestricted free agent. So, the only thing I'd say is he'll be 28. So before you go rushing to make a dynasty trade, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, like now probably would be a decent time to acquire because we know dynasty, like whenever
you are officially now betting on a Nick Chubb injury for him to be valuable this year.
Well, so my point is more just in terms of like when news comes down, the dynasty community gets hyped and prices go up and things get weird. So, like we don't know where he will be, but if he signs somewhere that's an amazing situation, the time to buy is going to be now because people are going to be like, shit, well, he didn't get traded. Well, what the hell am I going to do with him on my roster? Come in, scoop it, see what happens. Like, you're rolling the dice regardless.
Yeah, I think my only thing would be like everyone this year is like, you should trade Nick Chubb because he's an aging asset. And like Kareem Hunt's an older asset. So the idea that I'm going to pay up for him is like odd.
It's odd, but it's the stock market, man. When the price gets hot,
I guess for me, like if I can magically get him for a second, sure, but I wouldn't trade a first rounder for Kareem Hunt.
And you definitely don't have to do that. So
okay.
It's an interesting opportunity while the manager in your league is a little kind of pouty. It's like, I was really going to try to contend this year. I was really hoping that he was going to help me get over the bump. Like, we're not going to know where he ends up going. Try and go in and do that now while that person is still sad. Because if Kareem Hunt does land somewhere pretty cool, even at the advanced running back age of 28, like there's still a lot of tread on those tires because after the Casey
that is true
fallout, like he's been a part-time player, dude. Like he does not have nearly the same wear and tear that other 20-year-old or 28-year-old running backs do.
Yes,
so that could be fun. That could be fun, even if it's only for like your contention in your league next year, even if it's only a 1-year window thing, which at his age is probably only going to be a 1-year thing anyway, but worth a shot in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. But for this year, we're in agreement. He's just like the most valuable handcuffed in fantasy, basically.
I go back and forth on who I think that is periodically, but he is always in the discussion. Yeah. Yes. Always in the discussion.
And then I think you can still play him as a flex or an RB2 if you literally have nobody else. Because you can't drop him, obviously. But like,
and not only that, but I feel like perhaps some of
now
the frustration
that he's being kept around.
Exactly. Like some of the frustration from this year may have just been the fact that like maybe they didn't want to trot him out there because they intended on trading him.
Possibly.
Like, like
it did seem like they were interested in the concept of trading him.
Exactly.
This isn't something like with Elijah Moore where the Jets were basically like, yeah, you can take a week off if you want, but you're not going anywhere.
Exactly. Like, especially like for running backs, in the trade market or whatever, like the game that we saw on Monday night, like, yes, he got a lot of audition work, quote unquote. But prior to that, like, yeah, he had seen his involvement. Like, it's not like the same thing like with wide receivers. Like Chase Claypool's emergence over the last few weeks for the Steelers was clearly, at least at this point now, hey, showcase Chase Claypool. You can't really do that with running backs. So now that he's staying around, it could be a reason why. I don't know. I'm throwing a theory at the wall, but I think it stands to reason. Maybe he will ramp up an involvement. So
it is frustrating a season as it has been for him. He's finished RB4, RB20, 2 RB27 finishes. So, like, if you are using him as an RB2 or a flex, like, it hasn't been all for naught.
Exactly. Early on this season, it definitely paid off for you. So, yeah.
Like the RB60 finish in week 6 was definitely disappointing. But as we've seen, that New England run defense, can be a little staunch.
That they can. Nice vocab word, by the way. Look at that. There we go. See, we took our SAT. Actually, I never took the SATs. That's a lie. No, I never did that. I went to community college because I
took it once. I didn't prep for it. I was like hungover and like it was a thing.
Which is exactly how we do the Lateral Show, a sideways look at fantasy football. You can listen to this show every single week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. And you can always find the videos here at the Fantasy Six Pack YouTube channel. My name is Herms. You can follow me on Twitter at Herms NFL. I contribute fantasy work here over at Football Absurdity as well. And my day job, associate NFL editor at clutchpoints.com. If you want to check out my NFL coverage over there, please feel free to. And if you're an NBA fan, we got some hella good basketball content for your eyeballs. So that's all I got to plug. What about you?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, is your boy McLateral, aka McLateralFF, on the Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at McLateralFF and at MacMcMillanATL. McLateralFF is where I do all the fantasy football stuff, like telling you that my boom pick this week is Trevor Lawrence, who we've already talked about plenty this episode. I think he's got a great matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders, who are the best matchup for quarterbacks. And last week he was up against the Broncos, who were the worst. So, expect a bit of a bounce back. I think David Montgomery, though, is toast. He is my bust pick this week. The Khalil Herbert ascendancy has begun, and I would just stay out of the way. For more takes like that, you can, again, go to my Twitter, or you can go to Fantasy Six Pack, where I drop the heat check every Saturday. Looking forward to doing it this week, as I do every week. Last week was definitely an interesting one. And then you can also go to Tom's Guide, where I write about the latest in tech, gaming, and entertainment. And I think that is it. So, yeah.
There it is. Shout out all the new faces and new places. Shout out all the fantasy fallout that could hopefully make or break your fantasy season as we enter the month of November. Every win matters, folks. Just take all of this advice, take it into your brain, absorb it, and do the best in your pursuit of the playoffs. Until next time, this has been another edition of the Lateral Show!
Phillies and five.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lateral Show. Fasten your seatbelts, because here we go.